Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad to have all of you along with me today. Here's a question for you. How do you think about retirement? I know, it's a big ball of wax, but for many of us, we think about it as an abrupt transition. You go from full time work to full time freedom. But in real life, what we're seeing is that it's not always working that way. In fact, there's another approach that is catching on. It's called phased in retirement. And with a phased in retirement, this period of life looks more like a slope than a steep hill. You gradually reduce the hours that you're working, your responsibilities for work over time, and you sort of ease into retirement at your own pace. My guest today says that phased in retirement and thinking more creatively about work could be the key to a better and more secure retirement for many people. Allison Schrager is an economist. She is senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a journalist whose writing you've probably seen in places like Bloomberg, where she's an opinion columnist. She is the author of a fabulous book called An Economist Walks into a Brothel and Other Unexpected Places to Understand Risk. We'll be sure to talk to her about that as well. Allison is also the co-founder of Life Cycle Finance Partners, which is a risk advisory term and a risk advisory firm. And last but not least, she previously led retirement product innovation at Dimensional Fund Advisors and has been a consultant to international organizations like the IMF. Allison, welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. You recently wrote a couple of pieces for Bloomberg about the state of retirement in the US and what's gone wrong. And I'd love to start there and just learn more about, from your perspective, where are we off the rails when it comes to the way people think about and plan for retirement?
Well, I think it's important to understand that, people talk about retirement as if this is this crisis that we've put ourselves in from moving from defined benefit to defined contributions. And I don't think that's quite right either. I don't think we've ever really had a golden age of retirement. And that actually, because defined benefit plans were so expensive, a lot of people didn't have them. And so the move to defined contribution actually means more people have retirement benefits. And there's studies that people have higher income retirement. There's lower rates of poverty in retirement than ever. So in a lot of ways, there's a lot wrong, and I think we can make it better. But I don't think it's necessarily the disaster that people think it is. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't make it better either. It doesn't mean
Well,
there's not a, yeah.
let's just pause there for a second because I want to make sure that everybody who's watching understands the terms that you're talking about.
Mhm.
When you talk about defined benefit plans, you're talking about the traditional pension where a company would take care of you if you work there long enough, essentially
Mhm.
through your retirement. Defined contribution is the system of plans that we have like 401ks and IRAs, where we contribute to our retirement for ourselves and are responsible for growing that money. And I hear what you're saying, that defined contribution have put retirement assets in the hands of more people over time. So why do people insist that we have a crisis?
Well, I mean, we have put this huge risk problem on people, and I don't think people appreciated, how what a big and expensive risk problem that is. And I think it's just partially more awareness. And there is some truth to that it is genuinely a harder problem to solve now because people are living longer. So retirement is more expensive, especially because while retirement age has creeped up a bit, it really hasn't increased in line with life expectancy. So people do have to have a more expensive retirement to finance just because it does go on for longer. So I think some of it is more awareness and some of it is a legitimately more expensive problem they do have to solve.
One of the things that you talk about is how unprepared people feel when it comes to retirement. The Alliance recently commissioned a study. It shows that 2/3 of peak 65 boomers, and we are at peak 65 right now, that period of time in which more people are turning 65 than ever before in history. And this is a spate of time that's going to last from now until the year 2030. Those people, 2/3 of them, will feel financially challenged in retirement. Why do you think people are feeling so unprepared?
Well, it's pretty obvious that they would be because, this whole problem that people face in retirement, the financial problem of how much can I spend each year? How do I manage my money after I retire? Or it's actually, like, I think as Bill Sharp said, the hardest financial problem he can think of. And people really, don't have the right tools. They don't have the right education. We've pushed this incredibly complex. I mean, I think it's more difficult than any, like, people get paid a lot of money on Wall Street to manage risk problems. I think this is much harder. And yet we've put it on all individuals. Some of them as well are in cognitive decline and are going to have to face that reality. And, like, we wonder why they feel insecure. Of course they do. They actually have more money to work with than they probably think, and they probably have more tools out there than they realize. But we've given people a very hard problem to solve, and we've given them no education. I feel like everything we do, I do like 401k type plans as a concept, but I think we've implemented them has been completely wrong. And we effectively have gotten very good at the easy part of the problem, which is how do you save and invest while you're working? So the industry is very geared towards that phase, which is the easy part. And then we sort of just leave people hanging for the hard part. And, and if you look at the sort of solutions people are given, they're completely inadequate. Things like the 4% rule effectively expect people to have huge swings in their income year to year. We would never expect someone who's working to tolerate that swing in income, yet then we expect retirees who often do have a fixed income, who have health problems, who, have a limited income, to live with this amazing amount of risk and not give them any tools to manage it. So anyway, I think things financially on paper look better. We just have really dropped the ball on what people do when they actually retire.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think the media, and I've been part of this media for decades, has been complicit. We have spent an awful lot of ink and an awful lot of time explaining to people that they need to accumulate, accumulate, accumulate. They get it. It took a while for them
Mhm.
to get it, but they now get it. But we haven't even cleared our throats when it comes to the decumulation phase, the taking this money and making it last. When you describe that as a problem of risk, can you talk about that a bit? Like, what are the risks that we are managing for?
Well, all financial problems are a risk management problem. But it could be, how much money do you lose each year? That's actually a risk problem that I think is relatively easy to solve. But the problems in retirement are you don't know how long you're going to live for. You don't know how your spending needs are going to change. Generally, what we're finding is early in retirement, in your 60s and 70s, you're quite physically active. You want to spend money on travel, on your family, all these sorts of things. And then a lot of people go through a phase where, they're not in dire health, but they're not in great health. So they're not spending a lot of money on things like travel. So they're not really going out much. And then they generally have a very sort of bad health event that usually is how they die. And that is also incredibly expensive and could require years of care. So you think these are all very complicated financial problems. How long does your money last? How do you structure your spending for these changes in life cycle? And the changes can happen very suddenly and unpredictably. So, and you also obviously still have the financial home market risk to deal with as well, which is another source of uncertainty. So, I mean, you can see why Bill Sharp thinks this is the hardest financial problem in existence. It is legitimately very big sources of risk that are completely unpredictable, and you don't have a lot of tools to deal with them.
When we think about risk in other parts of our lives, we tend to think about insurance.
Mhm.
When we think about our homes and what would happen if there was a fire or a robbery or a flood. When we think about our cars, and if there was an accident, we are very willing to insure for those things. When it comes to this problem of making our money last, the solution would seem to be annuitizing, buying an insurance product to solve for some of that risk, to take some of that risk off of the plate of the individual and put it on an insurance company where they can pool the risk in order to better manage it. Put your risk together with a whole bunch of other people's, like is done with a group health insurance plan. What do you think of these kinds of solutions, and why do you think they haven't been more widely adopted?
I mean, I really like them, as you point out, by the, like, you can either suppose, you might live to 100, and you'd have to put aside enough money to live to 100, and there's only like, whatever, I don't know, like a 30% chance that's going to happen, like assuming you're in good health. But you have to plan for that. But if you pool with other people's risk, then you can spend as if you're going to live to 82, because the people who do die earlier will subsidize you. And that's the way the insurance works. And so it is like one of those free lunches in finance that you don't get often, where, you can actually get bigger bang for your buck. But the problem is people don't like annuities. And I think for a lot of reasons. Partially, it is just education, and people don't have saved all this money their whole lives. And this again goes back to education, that we've geared up, save, 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 save. So I think psychologically, it's hard to then write a check for all of that money you've spent your whole life building to some insurance company. I mean, I think that's just a hard thing for people, especially they know that, if they do die earlier, that's money they didn't get to leave to their kids. Or if they do have a big health event and they need to pay for care, that's now money not available to them. So I think that's part of it. And then I think there are some bad annuities out there. I mean, they're very complex. They have big fees. Part of it is, I think, insurance companies understanding all these hurdles and then trying to give people options to get the money out. But then if you do that, the insurance market doesn't really work. So then you have to end up paying this ridiculous fee for these options. And then it gets really complicated really fast. You have some bad actors selling annuities. So people end up with sort of not great products that they've paid a lot of money for. It doesn't mean there's not good annuities out there. I think there are. But we don't have a great channel to get them to people and to educate people on what they're getting. And as I said, there is just a natural reticence to them. But I think a lot of that could be overcome with better education.
I would think, and I know that the Alliance would agree on this, that the suggestion would not be to take all of your money and annuitize it, but to take a chunk of your money that might cover your fixed expenses for as long as you think you might live, and then, allow the rest to grow to keep up with inflation and other costs in the market. What's always fascinated me about annuities is that economists like you tend to really love them. Why do economists like them so much?
Well, I think it is about the fact that it's just thinking, how can as a financial economist, you're always thinking, how can people get the biggest bang for their buck in terms of risk? And it is, as I said, a bit of a free lunch. I said, like, we even call it the annuity puzzle of, like, why aren't people buying annuities? And as I said, some of it is just education. Some of it is people already do have a partial annuity from Social Security, so they feel like they have enough. Also, as I said, it is, I think, just a lack of education. I think more products are coming out. Like, I'm also a big fan, as you are, of annuitizing for your fixed expenses and using, your assets you manage yourself and riskier assets for things like trips or presents, like things that you can sort of manage, bet on year to year. Another good option is deferred annuities, which are, I think, big in the Secure Act, which is, it would be actually like insuring against living past age 85. So you buy an annuity and then it kicks in when you're 85 or so. So it is actually like longevity insurance. So there are creative ways around it. But I think the industry in the past got lost in sort of and certainly there are some bad actors selling that people just, annuities got a bad name. And so a lot of that was unfair, but some of it was not great.
I referenced earlier in the conversation a piece that you wrote for Bloomberg about phased in retirement. And you argue that the issues that we face in retirement are relatively easy to fix. And one of the solutions is delaying retirement or phasing it in. According to one recent survey, 52% of Americans say that gradually decreasing their hours is how they would prefer to retire. So, where are we in terms of understanding this phased retirement approach? Is it are we on the learning curve?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the issues we're having, I think, with retirement in general is that, we moved to defined contribution world, our current way of doing things with baby boomers. And now they're only sort of now, as you point out, at peak retirement. So we haven't had to deal with these issues yet. So I think a phased in retirement is the future of retirement. And so it's taking off now just because baby boomers are now retiring and finding out that one, this is something they want to do. People, don't want to just pack it in and like sort of sit on the porch. They want to still contribute and feel vital and have purpose and see people. And also financially, they just need to. I mean, there hasn't been as good a research as I would like, but I think the data indicates that we saw that big increase in business formation during the pandemic. And I've seen some preliminary work that suggests a lot of that was elderly or sort of not older people, sort of starting new businesses, and exploring various kinds of gig work so they could find ways to keep working, or maybe work part-time or work more flexibly as they started, as the pandemic sort of hit and they decided they wanted to work less.
What is it that people like about this approach?
Well, I said, it really is true. I think that 70 in a lot of ways is the new 50. So I think a lot of people are reaching their mid 60s and 70s and being like, well, I still have things to contribute. And you know what? Like, I don't see myself as like my parent was at that age. And you know what? Like, they really aren't. There is something to that. And so they still, as I said, first of all, they probably need the money. And it makes a huge difference financially to even be working part time. It really makes your money stretch so much further. So, I mean, one, they have no choice. And two, I think they genuinely, want to stay active. And this is a great way to stay engaged and contribute to the world and contribute to work and have a sense of purpose and something to do.
And to stay connected, which
Yeah.
is really important. When you talk about the financial benefits of a phased in retirement and stretching your money, can you unpack what you mean there?
Yeah, I mean, it is just all of a sudden, like the way I like to think about financing retirement is you have these different like sources of income. You've got Social Security, you got the money from your 401k, maybe you have an old pension lying around. So sort of part-time work would be just another income source. So that means, say, you don't really have to rely on your 401k assets. You can just live off of that and Social Security, or if you can delay Social Security to 70, use that instead. So it just becomes a new income source, which means you don't have to rely as much on your assets. And in fact, probably even if you're earning half of what you were when you were working full time, that might be enough to pay for your living expenses. Because, probably leading up to retirement, you were putting a lot of money away for your retirement. You don't necessarily have to do that anymore. Or particularly for healthcare, now that you have maybe are on Medicare, you might have very different kinds of health expenses.
Yeah, I think people don't think about the fact when we're saving for retirement that when we're living in retirement, we're not going to have to replace that savings rate. And if you've been a good saver for many, many years, even if you've been unaware of it because those savings have been coming out of your paycheck through automatic deductions, that's a big chunk of money.
It is. And also, I mean, there's a paper like, oh God, it's 20 years ago now. I can't believe it. But still was one of my favorite economic papers from Eric Hurst about how retirees do spend less too, just because they have more time. Like when you're working a full-time job and have children to raise, you don't really have a lot of time. So you might just like pick up a meal at a convenience store. Like that's expensive.
Mhm.
When you're retired, you're not under that same time pressure. So you can go to early bird special or just cook at home more. So they do find that there's a huge drop in spending when you retire, just because you have more time to actually shop around.
Oh, I'm going to look for that paper. Maybe we can convince him to update it 20 years down the road. I want to talk about risk. You are an expert on risk. What is it about risk that fascinates you so much?
Well, I mean, for me, it is like the most fundamental of all economic problems. I mean, because economics at its core, why I became an economist, is this problem of, scarce allocation, allocation of scarce resources, and what's the optimal way to do this. And it's not a very, first of all, if you're not thinking about risk, you sort of have assumed away the hardest part of that problem. So it is what is, to me, like sort of the whole point, and also the most interesting and intellectually challenging. And I've also just been really blessed with, we're learning from great economists who are very focused on risk. So I guess they very much got me very aware of where the risk problem is. And you reach a point though where you look at people who sort of make assumptions or assume away risk, and this happens actually more often than not in economics. So it's only a small part of the field that really focuses on risk, and you realize it's just, well, you've just assumed away the hardest part. It's sort of that proverbial, or that sort of, people always joke make about economists. It's like you're on a desert island, and you just assume you have a can opener. Anyway, you're like on this desert island with all these cans you can't open. And to me, that's like assuming away risk. It's sort of like, well, how much money do I want to spend in retirement if I know I'm going to live this long and the stock market gives me 7% a year? It's sort of like, well, what's the point of that? I mean, that solution's useless. So I think it really is the most important thing. And as I said, it just intellectually makes the whole world more challenging to think about.
How would you advise consumers, investors, people
Mhm.
like me who do not have a degree in economics, who maybe got a C in
Mhm.
their intro to economics class? How do you advise us to be smarter about the financial and other risks that we're taking as we head toward retirement? What are the tactical things that we can actually do better?
Well, I mean, you really don't need an economics training to do this. The fact is, if you've made it this far, you've been making pretty good risk decisions at some point, I assume, because, risk is something we all deal with and all manage every day. And I think when I talk to people, particularly people in sort of weird professions, I'm always amazed that they're solving very complex, sophisticated risk problems all the time, and they just don't realize it, and they're not really owning that they're good risk managers. But I think a way to think about the retirement problem that would be more constructive than, just save as much as you want and then we don't know what happens later, is to think about all the sources of income you have and how they contribute. And as you're saying, think of things like Social Security. Maybe if you need another fixed income source, maybe annuitizing, to think about the things that will finance the things you absolutely need to pay for, like your however you're paying for your house, whether it's paying off a mortgage still, whether it's paying your HOA or whatever, food. Think about what you want your retirement to look like, and think about all the things that are like must-haves, and try to have a stable, predictable income source, finance those. And then think about the things that are nice to have, and then maybe think about investing that money in like sort of like a stock market, in a simple index fund. And sort of, I think the other thing people have to get used to the idea is that you might take money out of that. I think a lot of people, retirees I speak to, have this image that they're just going to live off interest payments. That's probably not going to be realistic. You save that money to spend it, and you're not going to have the retirement you want if you don't do that. And that is just fine. People have to come to terms with that. But I think when they start thinking about income tiers and risk tiers, that becomes a little easier.
Um, have you come to a convincing argument that can help people with that idea that they do have to dig into principal, that it's okay to spend principal? Because it's a really, after 40 years of saving, it's a really difficult switch to flip.
No, and I have this argument with my parents all the time, and I have not convinced them at all. Anyway, like, I do this for a living. They tell me I'm wrong, and I think it's just that sort of feeling like I'm going to need this money, and I get it, especially because retirement is expensive and it tends to end in a very expensive way. They want to make sure, although they also have a lot of insurance for long term care, so I'm not sure why they're so reluctant, but. As I said, I can't convince them either. And I think really it's just hard because we've all been conditioned to think save, save, save. So spending down, I think we haven't done people any favors by not conditioning them to think about that way. I would just urge people to think that this is a time you have worked for and you have saved hard for, and you did forego a lot of great things when you were younger to have that money. So I wish people would enjoy it while they can.
The other piece of that puzzle is longevity, which
Mhm.
is really tough to wrap your brain around.
Mhm.
Wildly misunderstood from the fact that your I mean the concept to me makes the most sense when I pause enough to think that, okay, the longer I live, the longer I'm going to live. So it's a moving target.
Mhm.
And and that makes planning for it really, really difficult. How do you think about longevity?
Well, it's also, I think, an unpleasant thing to think about. I mean, these are hard things to have. I mean, I guess is it. I like you. I'm a big fan of insurance. As I said, you can even just insure against very long about longevity. You can buy long-term care insurance, although it's expensive. I think the market, needs more products to make all these things more viable. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard thing to think about, and especially because I mean, what does longevity mean? One thing I'm glad is, at least within the health profession, there's more talk now about not only living longer but living well and increasing the quality of your life. Because, as I said, they say 70 is the new 50, but 80 is still 80. And ideally, I'd love to get to the point where 90 is still 90, but 80 is the new 60. Uh, and I think if you're thinking about longevity, the question is, you don't have a lot of control over it, but like, how can we get to that?
One of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation was this idea that as we get closer to our goals, and this has been true sort of with the accumulation phase of retirement. As we get closer to any financial goal, we're conditioned that we should take less risk.
Mhm.
If you are investing for the college education of a child, you're very aggressive when they're in elementary school. You're a little less aggressive when they're in middle school. By the time they're in high school, you're even less aggressive because you don't want the market to tank and the value of that 529 that you've been contributing to for such a long time to go the way of the market without giving you enough years to make it back up. How do you apply that concept to your 60s and your 70s and your 80s?
Well, I don't really agree with that concept, because I mean, really, I think that misunderstands the risk problem of, well, first of all, like, you don't know if you're going to make it up. Like, you could, like, markets can be bad for like 20 years. So I think you want to think about how comfortable you are with risk in general. And if you're not comfortable with loss, then I mean, you should just be in more fixed income. Because as I said, there's no guarantee you're going to make it up. And if you pull that money out, you could miss a big run up. I mean, you just don't know. I think you just have to think, am I comfortable with risk at all? And invest according to that, rather than thinking you can't really time it of, okay, I'm closer now, so I'm going to get safer, and that will ensure I'm going to get to where I need to get. Especially now that inflation's an issue. I mean, there really is no safe asset, and there's no way to insure those last years. I think you just, in finance, we call this the fallacy of time diversification. That like more time is riskier, and it's actually, or more time is less risky, and in fact, more time is more risky. If you think about an insurance premium, the longer you have the insurance premium, the more expensive it is because there's more things that could go wrong. You could have 20 years of bad returns. So I think we all just have to check in with the level of risk we're comfortable with and invest accordingly. And if you're someone who's comfortable with having sort of more uncertainty with how much you can spend year to year, then as your 60s and 80s, then, invest more in the stock market. If you're someone who's like, like now that I'm older, I want to know what I'm going to have year to year, then I would definitely recommend finding a simple fixed annuity and sort of de-risking by handing off the problem to an insurance company. Or, I mean, the other alternative is that there are these laddered bond portfolios, but those are kind of hard to do without a lot of help.
Help is where I was going to take this conversation. Mm-hmm. These are really complicated concepts that we are talking about. They're complicated products that we're talking about and strategies. I'm sure that there are a lot of people listening who are thinking, I just can't do this by myself. What do you say to them?
I say you're probably right. I say that even like economists I know who do retirement get help. So if you do feel like this is too much for you, this is not a personal failing at all. This is just the realistic thing they said. This is an incredibly difficult financial problem. There's a lot of products out there, and managing is hard. And also, we also always have a lot of cognitive dissonance about our own mortality. So that's another reason why you should get help. I think the thing is you want to find good help. A lot of people don't trust the help out there, and there's definitely been a lot of abuses out there for good reason. So I think technology might empower more advisors to serve more people for less money, and I hope that's coming along. But I think I don't right now. My financial life's pretty simple, so I don't get help, but I anticipate I will eventually because it's like therapy. Most people can't get through life without checking in with someone helping them like sort of live their life better. And I think the same is probably true for your financial life. I said I work with economists who work on this, and they're Nobel Prize winners, and they have help. So I think find someone who's fee only and you feel like can explain things to you. I think that's always the most important thing. If you ever feel condescended to, or they explain things in ways you don't understand, it's the wrong advisor for you. So pay them a fee you're comfortable with, and make sure that they make you feel heard and understood. And they never say things you don't understand. Or if they do, they'll explain them to you in a way they can.
100% on that. Allison Schrager, thank you for the conversation. If we're looking for more information about you, about your work, where do you like people to go?
You said I'm at the Manhattan Institute, and also, you can find my page at Bloomberg where my weekly commentary is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. It's always fun.
And if you're looking for more information from us, you can find it at protectedincome.org for this conversation in particular, protectedincome.org/Schrager. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.